The Cleveland Cavaliers are 17-1, but what strikes me most about the Cavs' hot start is how similar it feels to year one of the Warriors dynasty. 10 years ago, Steve Kerr inherited a team that had averaged 49 wins over the previous 2 seasons and had won just 1 playoff series together. Kerr reinvented the Warriors' offense, turning a stale attack into a devastating motion offense. In addition, he empowered a defensive forward named Draymond Green, unlocking Green's playmaking prowess and two-way genius. 67 wins and a championship later, the Warriors' dynasty was off and running. Fast forward a decade. Kenny Atkinson inherited largely the same Cavs roster that had averaged 49.5 wins over the last 2 years while winning 1 playoff series together. Cleveland was an elite defensive team that wasn't getting the most out of an explosive backcourt or its defensive phenom in the frontcourt. Sound familiar? Under Atkinson, Evan Mobley has been empowered, with the formerly rigid big man now looking more fluid and decisive than ever. It's now quite common to see Mobley bringing the ball up the floor and even orchestrating the offense from the elbows, allowing star guards Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland to spend more time off the ball. The result? Cleveland went from 16th in offensive efficiency last season to currently boasting the most efficient offense ever, without any slippage on the other end. Now, there are obviously other variables at play, and none of the Cavs stars are going to be as transcendent as Steph Curry. Just like Cleveland won't be able to add another star as good as 2016 Kevin Durant. But the Cavs' overall performance this year has been just as impressive, if not more so, than Golden State's was in Kerr's first quarter season on the job, back when critics didn't think the Dubs were championship material. In other words, when it comes to Atkinson's Cavs, you've been warned. You can hear more about my take on the Cavs on this Friday's episode of Unfiltered, but for now, welcome to the Unfiltered Show. My name is Joseph Casciaro. My in-studio guests today, host of the JD Bunkis podcast, it's JD Bunkis. Co-host of the Hello and Welcome pod, it's Alex Wong.
What up?
JD, I promised you I would nail your
man.
promo today, and I still fumbled with it.
It's okay. It's all right. It's fine.
Just off to a great start here, boys. Off and running. But appreciate you both coming in. How you doing?
Good, man. Good. Good monologue. I liked it.
Appreciate it. All right. Well, what do you think about it? I mean, I gave my take there. A little too much hyperbole comparing this Cavs start to year one of the Warriors dynasty.
I think that you kind of nailed it though with the they don't have a Steph Curry. That's the thing is what really made the Warriors to me, well, I think to everyone unbelievably special is that Steph Curry was a truly transcendent player, and I just don't see that with the Cavs. Right. You get moments from Donovan Mitchell, and we've seen him in the postseason too, right? There's been proof of concept with him being a 1A scorer in the postseason. But until we see, I think, maybe a little bit more consistently from Darius Garland, who's had a bit of an up and down career, until we see a little bit more consistency offensively from Evan Mobley, and then them kind of figuring out what exactly the crunch time lineups are, I can't go so far to be like, I truly believe in this team. I thought that the Celtics game was probably more indicative of anything of this Cavs team than any of the other games from the 17 wins. And in that game, Garland's the brick show and can't get anything going. And you think, all right, they're always going to need, I think, all 3 of those guys to be humming at the same time. And they're not going to have the luxury that the Warriors had, which is that one of those guys, as in Clay or Steph, is going to be able to just carry them through whatever troubles they're going through. I just don't have that same faith in Donovan Mitchell. So that to me is the difference. The defensive stuff is very real. I think that if we're buying into anything about the Cavs, it's that they get stops. You really feel like they can get stops. But until I get a track record in the postseason, which is so unfair because we watch 82 of these games, but until I see Darius Garland get consistent buckets, until I see Evan Mobley, again, consistently attack the paint and, get to those areas where he can knock down that 12 to 15-foot jump shot with regularity, I'm going to have my question marks.
Yeah, I think watching that Celtics game, I kind of agree with JD, and it was not long ago, too, I remember this one version of this Cavs team getting punked by the Knicks in the first round of the playoffs. Them struggling to get past Orlando last season. Now, that's not to take away how much better they're playing this season. Another comparison I would give, maybe the 2015 Atlanta Hawks. A team that won 60-plus games. Yeah. And again, this is not to discredit the Cavs. I think JD makes a good point, too. Is whenever a team gets off to a surprise start here, about 20 games in, we suddenly have to talk about, playoff expectations, are they contenders and stuff. I don't think there's anything wrong with the Cavs making this jump in the regular season, being really cohesive, seeing the growth from the young guys like Evan Mobley, like Garland, winning 60-plus games. But when they run into a Boston, when they run into a Knicks team, some of these other teams, maybe even in the East, like I'm not sure how that's going to look in the playoffs. Like I don't know if I'm picking them as like the favorite over any of these teams.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I agree with both of you in the sense that I wouldn't actually pick them over Boston in a 7-game series. I wouldn't pick them over OKC if they were to actually get through the East into the finals. There's at least 2 teams, if not more, I would pick in a playoff series over them.
Still, if you're 3.
Yeah, if you're 3, that's great. And it does, like I said, it strikes me how these similarities do play. Again, they're not going to win 4 championships in 8 years. They're not going to make the finals 6 times in 8 years. They might not win one or get to one finals, but it is funny to me how there are these similarities from when Kerr took over to when Atkinson took over, just in terms of like how similar the rosters were and how revolutionized those teams were despite basically no player changes.
Yep.
And also the fact that we are sitting here having these conversations like we would have had 10 years ago with the Warriors, when you would say, yeah, Kerr's got them playing this beautiful offense and Steph looks like a superstar and all this, but like, did we really trust this team that got bounced by the Clippers last year and has only won 1 playoff series together? So it is fascinating. I guess it's always interesting to see is like, when do we start believing? Is it like, do we have to see them win 2 rounds and we're like, okay, now they're real? If they win like 68 games this year, you know what I mean? Like, because that's what it took for the Warriors. The Warriors went 67-15 that year, and people were still saying, yeah, but I don't know about in the playoffs.
I'm encouraged by a few things with them, though. One is that a year ago, it was like all talk of Donovan Mitchell is going to be out of town.
Yeah.
Right? Like, what happened to that? That's just gone. And I don't
Trill
know.
and Garland not getting along.
Shout out
like,
Cleveland, a small market that people,
exactly.
Joakim
like,
Noah has clowned.
There's a
Kept
lot.
the guy.
There's a lot of dysfunction around the league year over year over year, and I wonder if the Knicks making the Bridges move and then doing the Cat trade maybe helped the Cavaliers in some weird way, kind of like when, like not quite to the same degree, obviously, where you ended up adding a player like the Celtics did with Drew Holiday, where it's like, oh, dysfunction actually led to this. I can't help but think that Mitchell went, oh, there's no room for me there. Like, I'm not going there. This is my situation. I'm buying into more of it. And maybe that settled out some of the other players on that team in terms of buying into him as well, going, yeah, dude, like, you're one of us. You're not just bouncing to the next destination. And I know that for an NBA locker room, like, chemistry matters. Look at the Sixers right now. Even though they're missing guys, even when they've had some health, they're still crap, because it's so clear that the dudes don't get along with one another. Yeah. They're trying to figure out who the rat is and not how to win a basketball game. And then 2, the Cavs, to me, are still the best representation of like who could knock off the Celtics because of that defense and because of that depth and the lineup flexibility, right? Like, they have Jared Allen, and he's not even a guy that you think is going to be crunch time. But if the Celtics are going with Kristaps Porzingis and he gets hot, maybe you do feel like you can give him a different look. Maybe you are trying to take away the paint from some stretches of a team, even though he's not closing. And there's a lot of lineup data to suggest that like they're, maybe even in the category potentially trading a guy like that. But I just think like you hit on a Ty Jerome, you hit on the amount of players that you've gotten that are actually contributing to this team. Plus you add some layers to the scoring. Plus you add the defense. Plus you add a coach that you think is competent. Like, there's a lot there to be stoked on. I think what we're kind of driving at here is like, you can see the kernels of it. There's a reason to get excited because it makes it feel as though maybe it's not just going to be a cakewalk like it was for Boston last year. But ultimately, it's just like the 2 young guys they have, there's just no proof of them being able to do the most important thing, which is score the ball in big moments. Like, we just haven't got that yet. And so projecting it, I think, is one of the hardest things that you can do, especially when defenses are like completely geared into stopping you over a 7-game series.
Yeah, I think like you mentioned, the way they've built their team too, with like these kind of top 4 guys and like hitting on guys like Ty Jerome, having these role players. I think they're the perfect model right now of like how to build a team in this like kind of second apron landscape. Because like you have to hit on your role players and you have to have this core group that is whatever manageable under like the salary cap, but all the guys are contributing into their roles, right? Like, this is the problem with Cleveland the last few years. It's just that they were always better when one of the guys were hurt or 2 of the guys were hurt.
Yeah, man.
And suddenly now they're playing really well. And I will say too, like, even though I'm like, oh, not going to put them like, oh, as a favorite or whatever, like, I know Boston, when they're at their best, like Porzingis just came back, like when they look great, they look great. But it's like, to me, I look at Boston compared to like other kind of favorites in the past. It's not a team that can't be knocked off in a 7-game series. There's variance with their 3-point shooting. Like there's just, and you talk about like Cleveland, like what is their kind of like superpower, right? Like you talk about the Warriors, like it was, Steph maybe taking over, Draymond in his prime kind of unlocking some of those defensive lineups. Like, is it going to be those two young guys stepping up? Is it going to be their defense that kind of takes over? Like they have to show us what that thing is that kind of gets them to that next level, right?
That's great.
And I don't think we're not going to be able to see that until the playoffs.
Exactly. They very much got to prove it to us the way the Warriors ended up doing that year. But to JD's point, I do think it's a great story that a small market team pushed their chips in to trade for a player like Donovan Mitchell, even though no one thought he wanted to be there and everyone knew he had eyes on a bigger city.
Like the second they traded for him.
Right.
Yeah.
And instead, they actually convinced him to stay, and now they look like a bubbling juggernaut. I think that's a great story. The last time the Cavs had a juggernaut team, LeBron James was in town. That's the way I could segue to some for LeBron.
Well, I was going to say, how about LeBron? Should LeBron end his career in Cleveland?
Can I ask you guys one question off the Cavs before you pivot?
Yeah.
Do you guys think that the record will ever be like this, like 73 wins? Like when you see 17-1 start, when would you think about that record? Like
they'd have to be like 50-5.
Honestly,
yeah,
I was going to say it'd be like
50
40
it's
and
50
2 or
games?
something. It would have to be
Yeah.
like insane because
I haven't thought about it at all.
me neither.
Yeah.
And the thing
until
is,
you did that monologue, and I was like, oh yeah, I guess.
yeah, no, I think for me to think about it, it's got to be like 50, 60 games in. And the reason, too, is because there's so much more parity in the league right now, too. And, I had that monologue about the Warriors. It was the following year they ended up winning 73 games.
Yeah.
But by then, it really did feel like this team was
they were a
almost
team.
unbeatable.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
invincible. I'm not anywhere close to that with the Cavs. And the league is so much more balanced. I'm like, they're going to lose a game they shouldn't lose at some point. Like,
you also got to be like Cash said, like you got to be beating teams like just blowing them out if you're like going on those runs.
Yeah.
And I think it's really hard now, like Cash said, with today's NBA.
Yeah.
To be a team like that, that's like, like I remember Miami too. Then they go on that like 20+ game
27
win
27
streak,
game
right,
win
with
streak.
LeBron and
Yeah.
stuff. Like they were crushing teams.
And they still finished with, I think, 66 wins, like 7 wins short of what would be needed. All right. Mention LeBron. The reason I want to talk about him today is he's taking a break from social media.
He not on Blue Sky?
I'm so ready for
Not
this.
LeBron.bluesky.social
Usually
or whatever?
LeBron waits till the playoffs to do his Zero Dark 23 thing where he goes off social media. Doing it early this year. He has a big year in LA. So last week, he shares a tweet, I think it was a tweet from Rich Kleiman, who was a Kevin Durant's manager. The tweet essentially was saying that sports media has become too negative. Sports is supposed to unite people. I specifically referenced the LeBron and JJ Redick podcast and the Olympics as like what sports media should be. And then later LeBron followed it up by essentially saying he's going to take a break from social media. So, Alex, we can start with you this time. Do you care about this? Do you think it's meaningful? Like, what are your general thoughts on... Like, do you see why LeBron would want to unplug for a bit, or do you think this is just classic, maybe a little narcissistic?
I know LeBron the same age as me because like we're from the generation where we still used to like when we took social media breaks, we would write whole blog posts about it and stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas you remember it's like you would like write a post and be like, why I'm taking one week off, 1 month off social media.
Your MSN Messenger.
So what is
handle
LeBron?
is like at its max?
What is LeBron getting at here? Is it the criticism, like all the coverage with Bronny as well? And in general, because like Bronny on the Lakers, I know there's some talk about him like not going on road games and the G League and stuff like that. Like LeBron knew what he was doing when he was bringing his son into that Lakers spotlight, right? Like I don't think he should be surprised by that. He's been in the media spotlight for 20+ years, and we don't have time for this, but I don't know why. Like
We got time. If
I
you
don't
want to
know
talk
why
about it.
I don't know why athletes just construe everything about media like critiquing or talking about them as just negativity now. Like why is everything have to feel so personal? Like, do we not have examples of us celebrating LeBron for 2+ decades? Did he not just put out a Netflix series starting 5 with his production company where he comes off looking pretty great in that too? So I just think there should be a balance in the way that athletes are like understanding how media are talking about them. And you can't just take the most extreme talking heads and use that as an overarching example on everybody. So I wish LeBron well. I hope to see him on Blue Sky. So.
I find LeBron like off the court exhausting. Like I don't get it. Like you make a lot of great points there that you raise of just how much praise do you want? Like you already call yourself the greatest of all time. Most people's conversations about you, like if you take like the public at large, are just about whether you're the greatest player in the planet who's ever existed or not, right? Like that's it. That's the framework of LeBron James. Most people, like one of my favorite crutches that media guys use is when they go, LeBron doesn't get enough credit for how great he's been off the court and how he's never gotten in trouble. Like LeBron absolutely gets enough credit for that because he's been around for 2 decades. We've done every single piece of the LeBron James story. And I just can't understand how someone who's as accomplished as him, who gets the praise that he gets, who gets celebrated the way that he is, that it just seemingly is never enough. And it's like, if it has to do with his son, you're right. For someone to be this media savvy, to be this calculated with everything he does from a media standpoint, to be this oblivious to the way that this was going to be received when every single scout on planet Earth has essentially said he's not an NBA player. We know he's there for nepotism. And then you continue to do things like, please treat him differently, which is the worst thing you can do with a Nepo baby, right? Like, the number one strategy for a Nepo baby is like, get into the business, get your foot in the door, but then basically try to separate by being the hardest worker, by doing all the grunt work, by like really trying to earn your stripes and let everybody see that you're not content with just having things handed to you. And then it's like, he's not going on the road with the G League team. He's getting it. They're cutting the mesh down in Cleveland when he hits a jump shot. Like, they're treating him like it's a Final Four game when he hits a jumper in Cleveland. He's getting the red carpet treatment. Like, imagine some of these dudes from some of their upbringing seeing Bronny enter the league and get celebrated this way when they're better. We've all been in a walk of life. We've either been on a team, we've played on or been a part of a job where we've thought like, hey, someone who is not as good as us or who doesn't work as hard as us or whatever it is getting more opportunities than we are. And it's a really frustrating thing. So imagine that dynamic from every single NBA player right now that's getting no minutes, that's getting no shine, or who is playing well and gets no discourse because he opens up ESPN every day. And it's like, Bronny got 4 points with the G League. It's like,
on 2 of 10
it
shooting.
would drive you nuts. So for LeBron to not see at all kind of like his own doing in some of these narratives, for LeBron to not understand that his continuous driving of I'm the greatest and I'm the best and the league bubble is the hardest championship and all the like lying that he does and all the weird LeBron anecdotes, that this doesn't play into some of the perception and some of the exhaustion around him is annoying. So it's like, yeah, you're one of the greatest basketball players of all time, but you got to be one of the corniest dudes who ever lived when it comes to the media stuff. Like, it's true.
Yeah, and listen, like, can we all agree that there is some toxicity at times in sports media? Sure,
Always.
of course,
It's
but
ever present.
Right. But what strikes me so much about LeBron and a bunch of athletes is how, not just how little self-awareness they have, but also how little awareness they have of what fans actually want. And what I mean by that is like, okay, like, he's trumpeting that Rich Kleiman tweet because Kleiman also, references the LeBron and JJ Redick podcast as like what sports media should be. Was that podcast great for like inside basketball stuff and 2 basketball geniuses talking about? Yeah, absolutely. And there's an audience for that, for sure. But there's also an audience for transactional talk. There's an audience for being a fair critic of what's going on and off the court. There's an audience for all that stuff. And players like LeBron thinking, and Draymond too, I think always talks about like the new media, right? Because he's got his own pod. It's like what these guys fail to realize is that we can see through it like, yeah, there's a space for that stuff, but it's also often a biased and very censored version of things because it's their own production. It's content that is very filtered, right? Yeah. And that never is going to actually allow us to see the full picture. And the fact that they think, no, this is what everyone wants. Like, we're going to give them this because that's what they want. They want to see us talking. It's like, but you're actually giving us half the story because you're never going to fully reveal yourselves in it. That is not what the audience wants. And another thing I'll mention, too, when it comes to LeBron is the hypocrisy of this in that people forget 2 years ago, he's talking about like how negative it can be on social media or whatever. How about 2 years ago when he threw a bunch of his NBA peers under the bus by saying his 17-year-old son at the time was way better than some of these cats he was watching on League Pass,
I love you
right?
pulled it up too.
2 years ago, 2023,
receipts.
that's the tweet. And, I don't remember anyone coming out and being like, social media, way too negative. LeBron's under here throwing his peers under the bus, saying that his 17-year-old high school son is better than guys in the NBA. Come on, man. And now 2 years later, you're, because of the criticism, which we all know, this is why. It's because of the criticism of his son. Now you're going to be like, yeah, social media, sports media, way too negative. I need a break. Come on.
I'm only gonna excuse that tweet if he was watching the Bucks and Thanasis checked in.
Yeah.
Okay? Otherwise,
Hey, you know what? Thanasis would body Bronny.
you know what? I would love to see that. That would actually solve All-Star.
You know
Saturday.
who wouldn't love to see that? LeBron James, because
Yeah.
it would be a bad result for
I think
Bronny.
the other thing too about him speaking out on behalf of his son is like, you know, like just let your son have some agency in this too. Like if Bronny has an issue with any of this stuff, I know he's young, he's just coming into the league. Like I can't remember, like I know Bronny's obviously done like media interviews and stuff, but I would love to just learn more about him through him. You know what I mean? Versus like LeBron having to step out and kind of, you know, be the dad that like kind of protects his son. Like at some point, LeBron's got to figure out whether he's going to let Bronny kind of just figure out his own path or be constantly folding Bronny's narrative into his own, which is like what he's doing in this case.
Which is part of what makes it feel at times to me a little icky, is that it's like, this is about my son, when in reality it's nothing to do with him, because the right path for your son would be to continue to develop, maybe stay in college, maybe have gone to the G League, maybe to go to these road games. But it's like, you want him on the floor with you to like further explain the longevity of your career. And that's the part of this that's like, okay, when we're celebrating it as like the coolest story ever, I'm like, and the worst is when they compared it to Ken Griffey Jr. Like they've got the Griffies.
Yeah, one of the
house.
greatest
That's what I mean.
baseball players ever.
Exactly. Like Ken Griffey Jr. was not Bronny. And the idea that they are, and like trying to put it forward that way and then not getting it received back to you as exactly that which you want is, again, insufferable. So to me, this is kind of like, if you want to talk about LeBron's longevity, it's also a sign of how long he's been in his own bubble with all of his own yes men and how disconnected he is from reality. And I think that happens with a lot of these guys, is the further they're in it, the further they're surrounded by just people that are basically their own echo chamber, which is maybe surprising that that's why he doesn't like social media, because I thought the whole thing now is that it's just like curated to be exactly what you want to see and what you're engaging with. But yeah, to me, like that's what this is LeBron only wants to hear one thing, that he's the greatest, that he is being celebrated for all of his achievements, and that any human element or any other discourse that he's not approving is much like a dictator where he's like, yeah, I don't want to hear it. Keep it out of me. Keep it out of my range.
Yeah. And like I said, and it's gone to a point where now it's also like they think, and other people don't want to hear it either. So no, we actually do.
No, we do.
We have an appetite for a lot of different types of sports media, including real sports journalism, which unfortunately a lot of these athlete-produced content things are not real.
Well,
they can be entertaining, but it's not sports journalism.
Why does Teagues resonate? Because he's self-aware.
He's just a regular dude. He talks about himself in a way that feels normal and relatable to people. Everything else is such a put on. Like, listen, like I can't tell you how many times I rolled my eyes when I was listening to the LeBron JJ podcast, because
I cannot believe you even listened to it.
There was such a push whenever JJ would like ask LeBron an X's and O's question. He would always preface it with like, you know, I want to make sure I'm not asking you a question that's narrative driven, because we don't want to do narrative. And I'm like, why are we creating these divides and boxing stuff out? And like you mentioned earlier, these players are always talking about how much smarter they are than us, and they are, about basketball and wanting to do it on these player podcasts. But then they'll turn around and expect us to talk about basketball in that way when they clearly know that they're better at it. And then they'll get all upset when we try to do like our narratives, like personality driven stuff, all this stuff. I just don't like how athletes are trying to drive this wedge now of like, you can only talk about basketball in this like one particular way.
Yeah.
And it only hits a particular audience.
Well, I was going to say, that's the big part to me that makes no sense, is like, do you think sports will always survive for especially like our age group, where we want to watch the games, right? Like we're very interested in the games. We are interested in like the athletic achievements of these guys. But I don't know if in this media climate where you have subscription services to 8 different types of channels, right? Where you have a phone, where you have all these different things at your disposal, that just watching 48 minutes of NBA basketball, especially in a regular season game, is going to keep somebody's attention that way, unless you're invested in these guys as people. And you're not just going to be invested in them as like a super athlete, because you can't relate to any of that. I can't relate to what it's like to be LeBron James. I could dream about it when I was a little kid, like in my driveway. I was like, I have potential. It's like, nah, man, you're a 5'10" white guy from Canada. Like, you're not going anywhere. Like, it's not happening for you.
Maybe you can play half the G League schedule.
Yeah, like happily, you wouldn't complain. But it's just,
JD's like, these cats are lightweight.
we want to know, like, the things that are your flaws can also be the things that we end up gravitating towards you about. Like, one of the most most popular guys ever is Allen Iverson. Like, who is our age that doesn't love AI?
Flaws and all.
Deeply love Allen Iverson. And part of it was that he overcame certain things in his personal life, and he was a flawed individual. He became kind of an anti-hero for people. And so for LeBron, this idea that like he has to be pristine and he has to be perfect and everything needs to be done exactly the way he wants it makes you miss out on so many things about the guy that actually would be interesting, that actually would be fun discussions, and that would draw more people into being interested in him. Like, you want to know part of the reason why people don't love you the way they loved MJ is, again, part of the thing with MJ is there is a piece of the lore, which is negative stuff that he was overcoming. With LeBron, the only thing can be like what I said earlier, which is he doesn't get enough credit for how he never gets in trouble and that he's a perfect human being and that he's never made his mistake and he's a basketball genius. It's just like, it's exhausting to try to only heap praise on someone every single second of every single waking day.
Yeah, and MJ genuinely seemed to not give a flying F what anyone else thought, and that was part of it too. Also, if Ken Griffey Sr. back in the day had taken out, I guess, like a little ad in the newspaper to say, was watching some games last night, my son, these cats can't keep up with my son, he would have had a point. LeBron James in 2023.
I blame those guys too for sitting there and being a part of that charade. Like, they own a piece of this too, that they're like, that's you're the same. Like,
no, you're not. All right. Segment I introduced last week, since the panel is always going to be Toronto guys, is Raps City. Talk a little bit about this rebuilding Raptors team in honor of the Six. Try to do it in approximately 6 minutes or less. Okay. So my question for you, JD, we can start with you, is almost a quarter of the way into the season now, at 4-14, are you still buying that this is a feel-good tank, that, you know, everything's peachy, or as the season moves on, as the losses started to pile up, are you starting to kind of feel maybe a little more queasy about it, or all right, we've gone too far now? It can't be all sunshine and lollipops when you're 4-14.
I really hate this because I actually view myself as a pretty like pessimistic, negative person by nature. I love this Raptors team.
I'm shocked to hear that from you.
Oh no, everything about this is so enjoyable to me. Like, I cannot express the amount of joy I get watching them play these close games. It's like, what, 10 games now where they've been decided by 2 possessions?
Yeah. Two buzzer-beating losses in the last 10 days.
Like, I am simultaneously looking for crunch time questions and then rooting for Jaden Ivey as he buries them with a second left, going, yes, you need this. I guess I have 2 issues with it. One is I want to see them healthy because I do want to see what crunch time looks like, and I feel like that's the under-discussed part of this, which is like, hey, they're losing all these close games. They don't have a closer. You see Scotty Barnes get in the paint last night for the game-tying bucket, and you're like, yeah, that works. But what happens when they take that away from you? Like, what does it look like? Because RJ Barrett, to me, as good as this run has been, he's not a crunch time closer in the NBA. Like, it's just, if you're going to him, you're going to have the record that you have in front of you. We've seen flashes of it from Grady Dick, but how does that work in terms of the pecking order of this team? We need to see quickly out there. We need to see all 4 guys and see if the concept is, can you have closer by committee with these 4 dudes? Because none of them in a vacuum is going to be good in isolation. So that part of it is frustrating to me, but in terms of the losses, it's awesome.
And just a quick note on that. Those 4 guys plus Pirtle, their presumed starting lineup going into the season, have not played a single game together this year. They've logged 4 minutes together of court time ever going back to last season.
That's it?
Yes. And in addition to them not having not having their starting lineup in any game this year, they've also been missing multiple starters in 12 of 18 games, which is why they've been underdogs in all 18 games. But, on the whole note about how competitive they've been and kind of overachieving while being 4-14, they're 12-6 against the spread.
Oh,
the only teams with a better ATS record this year are Cleveland.
I bet them
and
every
Brooklyn.
game, dude.
Not me putting a live money line bet on them when they were leading in the fourth quarter.
All the time. Like, I love to bet on the Raptors games. It's so good. Take the spread, hope that they're in the game, and then watch them crumble down the stretch.
I'm with JD. Like, even the Boston game coming down to the stretch, obviously losing at the buzzer, the Detroit game. There's nothing more enjoying. Obviously, I have to watch Raptors, as part of like what I do too. But it's like there's nothing more that I enjoy more than watching the Raptors with a lead in the fourth quarter.
Yeah.
And seeing the ways that they come up with blowing it, like JD mentioned, like. No, but it's so inevitable.
Yeah,
it's so inevitable in a way that it's entertaining because, like, the last few years, I feel like we were just, like, banging our heads against the wall trying to see how this team was going to fit in with all the different pieces, talking about players going to free agency, Masai calling the team selfish and all this stuff. Now, I don't know how long it's going to last in terms of like feel good, because I think everybody has accepted that this year is kind of what it is, right? People already monitoring players that are coming through in the draft. We want to get excited about some of the young rookies that are on this team, see how Scotty does, like you mentioned, when everybody gets healthy. This year is going to be, I think, just like kind of whatever. Like, people aren't going to be putting those kind of expectations or asking questions about the team. But this is not going to last forever. Like, after this season, I think even heading into next year, there's going to be a lot of questions.
I think even this season, once they get all the guys healthy,
yeah,
at once,
you need to see something.
You can't have it look ugly. You can't have it be stilted. You can't have it look like weird deferrals rather than actual chemistry. So there's going to be a point this year where that happens. But no, I think that what you touched on there is why this is so exciting, is because the Raptors were a drab of a product for the last couple of years, and this is when rebuilds work. They don't work like, as a Pistons fan, nobody's excited about that team being like, oh, we're losing again. You know, like they've been in it for a while. For the Raptors, it's like, wow, there might actually be a bit of a clear direction here where they actually are getting younger, where they are trying something new, and that the goal of the season didn't go from what was playing for what to, when we love the play-in game and we're totally fine being a middling team with a bunch of guys on bad contracts, like that there's actually something about this team that's refreshing, is why the losses work. It will start to wear on you if you don't see the concept with the players they have. But as of right now, when they're shorthanded and it is such a hard departure from, like, man, for me, who has to watch these games, like for all of us who has to watch them, it was painful. Like, I would literally go to some of these and be like, strap in. Like, I couldn't believe people would be paying money to go down and watch some of these games. Like, I went to the Thunder game last year where they had like Justice Liberty Freeman taking like 40 shots. They got blown out by like 30 points. And I'm going, how is this any fun? This
I do say so. It's Javonte Freeman.
I don't know.
No, but I think it's hilarious because then when I was putting it together in my head, Justice Liberty Freeman. What was that? One of the jerseys in the bubble. Remember when they had the?
Oh my God.
I'm just saying,
That's
like,
great.
this does feel like it's at least something you can believe in and hope on and dream on, rather than what it was before, which is like just doom casting constantly to a 9 seed.
The questions are just different, right? Like, when you have a team like you had the last couple of years, it's like you're keying in on like, oh, do Pascal and Scotty work together? Like, there's very immediate answers that you want. Whereas right now everything's dialed back, right? And like that's what you get when you start a rebuild. And you get this little honeymoon period, but it's like, I have questions too about, like, based on the makeup of the roster, when they're healthy, like, can this be like an average defensive team? Like, what are we doing on the defensive end? All this stuff. It's none of these questions you're asking right now because they're shorthanded, they're rebuilding. Like, nobody really cares right now.
Yeah, no, I think the reason there's so much, I don't know, hope is one of the words to use, but also just so much more laxed kind of like just enjoyment of what's happening is because, as I said coming into the year, and to the point you were talking about how much of a drab it was the last couple of years, this is finally a team that knows where they are in their competitive cycle and what they're going to do about it. And that's, we could not say about this team the last couple of years.
Doesn't that scare you guys a little bit?
They had zero self-awareness the last couple of years.
Does that scare you guys a little? Because sometimes I watch them and I'm like, okay, so they're obviously rebuilt. Like, they turn the ball over too much. They're not great offensively. Even some of the assist numbers have started to like drop off. They don't shoot the ball particularly well. So like, there's reasons to believe like they're not very good, right? And they rebound the basketball well. Like, there's a few markers of fine. But part of me looks at this Eastern Conference and how bad it is, and I'm like, ooh, what if they go on like a little run and then Masai gets
15 of their last 20 games are against losing teams from last year. If they're healthy by then, again, just based on how competitive they've been while shorthanded, it is not out of the realm of possibility for this team to go on like a run that, you know, in the West they would have been too far buried already, but in the East it's like, well, they got to 31 wins and now they're hosting a play-in game.
Yeah, that's why it's like that's why I'm sort of against the wins and I need them to stack them right now.
No, very
because I
important
want this
losses right
direction to continue of feeling like it's going to this, rather than all of a sudden it's like, wait, they're a play-in team and they got a middle draft pick, and then there's all these questions that sort of aren't fresh anymore that bleed into the following season. Like, that's the nightmare I have is wins.
That's the problem with Adam Silver's NBA, man. Like, why would we have this play-in tournament? Like, there should be an extra play-in rule where if you're below 500, you just don't make it.
Yeah, or like
you're not in the play.
The bubble when they first, or sorry, the bubble season.
Yeah.
The first year they did it, when remember you had to be within a certain amount of games of 8. Of course, we know the reason they won't do that again is because it's guaranteed TV slots and money, and that's.
I trust the Raptors to understand what this season is about.
I think
and find a way to make sure that they're not getting the most wins possible.
Why do you trust them based on the evidence of the last 4 years?
They need to learn to I think they have their eyes on this draft, and I don't think they're gonna risk that. for like 5-10 more wins at the end of the season.
God, I hope.
At least
so.
I hope not, because I think
so.
the fans are expecting that too, right? Of this team trying to get the best lottery chance and to add another player to this core, like get into that top 3, whatever it is. So.
JD mentioned the Pistons, who are a rebuilding team.
Mm-hmm.
They've been a rebuilding team for a long time. A fan base that watched a lot of rebuilding and a process unfold and has not even seen a conference finals game to show for it yet is the Philadelphia 76ers. I've got my guy Trill from Philly coming on to talk about the Sixers in a little bit. But before I bring him on, I just wanted to give each of you kind of a parting thought or a parting shot when it comes to the Sixers and kind of what you've thought about what really has been a shitstorm so far in Philly.
Did the Thunder own their pick, right? But it's top 6.
Top 6 protected.
It's my nightmare. It's like either the Sixers get another awesome draft pick.
That's right.
Or the Thunder, my greatest nemesis,
this is personal.
Get a draft pick. So I can't even fully enjoy it the way that I want to. What I will say is I think they're dead. I think that Embiid, after the players' meeting, coming out and going like, whoever leaked that is a real piece of shit. Also, have you guys seen the Nick Nurse conspiracies?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, the elephant in the room conspiracy.
There is nothing I dream on more is that he's Leo in The Departed. That Nick Nurse, every time he's coming to his office, he's got that little elephant on his desk and Embiid's like staring at the elephant and he's just like, and then every time he's thinking about using the quote "elephant in the room," that he's just like, and it's like a really big thing that's in the room. Like, I don't know what's the saying for that. Like, he's trying to search for it. Like, it's a disaster. I don't think it's going to get any better. I think that they're trending towards Embiid sitting down, like them really just going, okay, the season's lost. You're sitting out the season, and we're going into like Jared McCain takes a million shots and makes a million TikToks land. It's a disaster. They're awful. I think the only interesting question about them is like, can they ever get Joel Embiid back to the versions that they've dreamed on for year over year over year? Because to me, it's like you prioritize Team USA, and if not this offseason, then like when you did all the talk, then when is it going to happen? And I don't know. This kind of feels like potentially the death of the process to me and the beginning of potentially a new one.
Yeah, I've decided to think that Reggie Jackson was the locker room snitch. I just think it's really funny. Like someone like Reggie Jackson or Andre Drummond would just be like leaking the news. But man, this Embiid stuff with all the injury news, like I do wonder if we're watching like just the end of it, the end of it for Embiid. And even when they got off to this slow start, I was hanging on to the fact that, hey, when they come back healthy, and we talked about what the East looks like, 5-game win streak will get them like right in the top 6. But yeah, I feel like that environment is too toxic, and the Embiid injury stuff is super worrisome. I don't know where this team's gonna end up this year. Like, I really don't know. But like, would it shock me if they get into the play-in?
No.
Again,
like, would it shock you?
Yeah, it wouldn't shock.
Or would it shock you if they finish with like a 500 record? What are they, 10 games under right now, right? I don't think that's that far-fetched. I feel like we're having those conversations about Milwaukee like 2 weeks ago. Yeah. Now, different, because, Giannis is playing out of his mind. They don't have questions about their top star, but like, I don't know. I keep hanging onto the fact that, there's talent there and because of the East.
What do you guys think about Paul George now, though?
As a podcaster or as a player?
So as a podcast,
you got to clarify these days,
like,
man.
As a podcaster, it's like, again, if you subscribe to that show, I don't.
I'm starting to think we might got to give Clippers front office a little credit too. You know what I'm saying?
I
know we were in here talking about the Clippers, like, what are you guys doing? Letting PG go, being like smart. All this stuff. And listen,
they're not looking too shabby right now based on that decision. All right, JD, Alex, for the people watching, make sure you are tuning in wherever you get your podcasts to the JD Bunkis podcast. Hello and welcome. Very much appreciate these guys' time. We'll have them in the studio again. But for now, let's keep the Sixers talk rolling and welcome in Trill, the man, the myth, the legend, co-host of the You Know Ball pod, a mostly Sixers podcast. Trill, thanks for joining us, man.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Apologies for the technological difficulties on our end. I know you've got some window-related difficulties on your end, as you mentioned off the air. Just a perfect microcosm of what the Sixers season has been so far.
Yeah, I look like Tom Hanks in Castaway right now. I have the light shining through my window because my cat knocked over my curtains. I think he's trying to protect me from this Sixers team. He's refusing to let me podcast or stream ever whenever I talk about the team. So I think he's looking out for my emotional well-being, but we're going to power through and we're going to suffer through some more Sixers talk as I've been making the rounds.
Yeah, you should name your cat Joel Embiid because there's always something wrong when you. On that note, those Philadelphia 76ers. All right, so the last time I had you on the show, I think it was just before the season started, and I had you on to talk about how it was like the most faith I had in a Sixers team in the Joel Embiid era. We both talked about, and justifiably so, how good it looked on paper with Paul George joining the fold, even if Embiid was going to be out a bit to start the season. And now here they stand at 3-13, 29th overall in the NBA standings, number 28 in offensive efficiency, 18th in defensive efficiency. Tyrese Maxey has played 10 of 16 games. Paul George has played 8 of 16. Joel Embiid has played 4 of 16. The Big Three has played 1 game and 6 minutes together. And kind of breaking news, guess what? Embiid and George are going to be out again against Houston. Talk to me, man. Let's get through this together. What are you feeling?
Well, first off, it's not a Big Three anymore with Paul George in it. I think we need to replace him with Jared. Because here's the thing. I mean, maybe we should replace Joel Embiid with Jared McCain, to be honest with you, because he doesn't play right now. So really,
maybe they have a big one, and it's just Jared McCain.
At this point, if you were to pick, now Sixers aren't getting an all-star at this point, but if you were to make a case for anyone on the Sixers to make the all-star team this year, Jared McCain has by far the best case as a rookie in, only starting a handful of games so far, really being thrown into the fire in his rookie season, because this team is just a mess. I mean, you look up and down this roster, and when we talked during the summer, I remember specifically saying this team is going to function as well as the stars are going to function. Can these three stay healthy? Can these three, build a chemistry and become an unstoppable two-way force with Paul George and Embiid, obviously, being two-way players. Tyrese Maxey having some difficulties on the defensive end, but, is just a complete superstar off the ball, especially functioning off of stars. And we were hoping that he would take some steps in his development as well this year, and everything has come crashing down in the first month of the season. I think the thing that people really get shocked by when I talk about them is the fact that I tell people all the time, they just got their first win in regulation the other day. They have 3 wins all season. Their first win that did not require overtime was against the Brooklyn Nets the other night, a game in which Tyrese Maxey and Jared McCain combined for 56 points. And really, the way that this team was built is that it does not function unless those stars are healthy. Those stars have been in and out of the lineup, and even when they've been in the lineup, they haven't looked like stars. So I can, look at other guys on this team who have underperformed, the Caleb Martins, the Kyle Lowry, who's just aging out right now, the, Kelly Oubre's and Andre Drummonds, who were, brought back and thought to be kind of something that could help basically weather the storm with these injuries. But ultimately, all this comes down to is if there is no healthy Joel Embiid, if there is no healthy Paul George, and if those guys never play together, this season is just a total waste. Like, there's no reason to even think of this team as anything more than a play-in team ceiling, and I'm talking like 8 through 10 seed ceiling, unless those stars can get healthy and figure things out, and it's just looking like it's just a year from hell for them.
Yeah, and like we were talking about off air too, one of the scary things when you talk about them getting healthy, forget just this year, but like long term, there has to be some concerns right now for Joel Embiid's long-term health, not just because of his history, but because of what's going on with that knee right now and the fact that they can't seem to get it under control. I mean, you can look on the opposite coast and in LA and what's going on with Kawhi and that kind of similar issue there where like they just can't get swelling under control. Like that stuff doesn't just go away. And for a player of Joel Embiid's size who does have the injury history he has, I'm concerned sitting here in Toronto. Like I can only imagine what you and Sixers fans are feeling there.
Yeah, and I've talked about this injury kind of ad nauseum, and I think people really get confused on why the team handled it the way that they did. The only thing that I think the team has done wrong with Joel's injury is their communication of the severity of this injury, the severity of this surgery, and how it can alter players' bodies and careers for the rest of their career. Like really the rest of Joel Embiid's life, to be completely honest with you. This is just something he's going to have to manage. And this is something that is, a very serious injury. We've seen it derail players' careers. We were just talking off the air about Lonzo Ball, someone who had this surgery, was only expected to be out a month or two, ends up turning into 2 years. He has to get this like innovative new surgery to try to fix it, and he still has not been able to get right since. We're seeing right now with Robert Williams, where Robert Williams is finally able to get back on the court and healthy years later. And it's all about, like you said, controlling the swelling, basically this pain tolerance. And another thing is that it leaves him more vulnerable to other injuries. Like the meniscus is, from what I understand, is basically what stabilizes the knee and makes it so that you can absorb a lot more pressure and contact. And if he has, he's had 2 injuries to this meniscus, and if he's just never able to get right, they might be living in the reality where he's just, 1, never the same, and 2, never able to really get it under control. And that's something that they knew the second he had this surgery, and they should have kind of communicated that to the fans and to everyone, and they've decided to go the other direction and keep it a secret, basically, even though there are doctors out there who have said this was always going to be the case.
Yeah, it's exactly. Similar to the Kawhi situation, it's the communication from the team to the fan base that I think probably has a lot of Sixers fans frustrated the way it has Clippers fans frustrated. One thing I wanted to get your take on, because I'm at the point where, like a couple of weeks into the season, I was not too concerned with the Sixers start because I would point to Milwaukee and say that team should be concerned. Those guys, their best 2 players are in the lineup and they're playing like crap. Denver was a little concerning to start. Whereas the Sixers, I looked at them and I was like, I'm not concerned. Once they get their stars healthy, they'll be fine. I'm at the point now where it's like, okay, yeah, all the caveats aside, everything I said at the beginning of this segment when I talked about, their stars being out as often as they have been, but I'm at a point where I'm like, this team is running out of excuses. And I think their last loss to the Grizzlies was a perfect example of that. And it's like, okay, yeah, you don't have Embiid and you don't have PG, but Maxi's in the lineup. McCain's playing the way he's playing. And also you were playing a jawless Grizzlies team that was without like 5 or 6 rotation players. And you didn't just lose this like ugly slugfest between 2 shorthanded teams. You got run off the court on your home floor. And that to me was a perfect microcosm of this thing where it's like, yeah, you've got some built-in excuses, but you're also running out of them pretty fast here.
That's the thing that I keep saying to people is I think that there are levels to this where, the injuries obviously and the availability are the number one thing for sure. Like, I think that is definitely the biggest thing holding this team back from reaching their potential. But just a general level of competency with the talent that they have should be achievable. Like, I don't think that they should be getting run off the court by even teams like the Clippers who, I know they've had a great season and their defense has been awesome, and James Harden obviously wanted to extract some revenge on Daryl Morey for the whole situation that happened, but ultimately those are similar levels of talent on those rosters. And I think that the way that the team has played so far has been disconnected, unorganized. I think that they really don't have any sort of identity or any plan going into any game. And I think part of, like I said, I think the large part of this falls on the roster management and all the injury stuff. But the underlying issue seems to be that this locker room has basically already been lost, seemingly, by Nick Nurse in, his second season after having a fantastic start. I've been joking on podcasts that he basically did the Toronto speed run just without the title. Yeah. The first 2 years of fun and success that he had in Toronto were, obviously you have the championship year and then you have the follow-up year where you guys we're on pace to win almost 60 games. You get to the second round, an honorable defense of your title, even without Kawhi Leonard. And then everything kind of comes crashing down after that. But the Sixers have basically done what happened with Nick Nurse in Toronto in the first 45 games last year before Joel Embiid got hurt. And then ever since that knee injury in January, everything has just been a complete mess. And you're seeing players even like this season that have gone on to new teams and had some success that really struggled here in Philadelphia. And I think, like I said, ultimately it comes down to the roster availability. It's hard to build a team around two stars that are never healthy and unavailable. We could talk about that all day, but there has to be a general level of competency when it comes to shot quality, when it comes to, just literally just running any sort of offense. They don't really do that. They're trying to run the same offense they ran with Joel Embiid last year without Joel Embiid, and that just does not work when you're functioning with the amount of talent that they have right now.
Yeah, you need a lot more creativity within your offense than what Nick Nurse's offense is currently showing when you don't have the stars to just give the ball to and kind of get out of the way or run stuff around Joel Embiid. When Jared McCain has literally been your best player, or when Jared McCain and Tyrese Maxey are the two best players on the court, you need a more functional system to generate good looks for everybody. And yeah, to your point, Nick Nurse's offense is not doing that right now. And, the defense has been passable. It's been fine, but it's also been classic Nurse at times where it's like you kind of ask questions about why they're overloading in certain situations. The players themselves look out of sorts with that. Those are, again, questions we had for Nick Nurse here in Toronto. And, I realize that it's only a year and a quarter into his tenure there. And again, there's a lot of built-in excuses. But based on everything we've said, do you get a sense that he is genuinely on the hot seat there, or is that something more that like people outside of Philly are projecting inwards?
I would be surprised if he didn't get at least. I think this year you can kind of chalk up to the injuries and availability if you can't get things back on track. I think that they would probably give him a start of next year if things don't work out. It would have to get to the point where he completely loses trust of one of the top three veteran players on the team, whether it's Paul George, Joel Embiid, or Tyrese Maxey, for them to move on. Because Daryl Morey has been hesitant to fire coaches in the past. Sixers ownership has been hesitant to fire coaches in the past. Like, if you look at their history, they tend to do it a year too late, if anything. I think with Doc Rivers and Brett Brown, they showed that they're willing to give guys second chances and kind of figure these things out. And a large part of that is financial, by the way. Like, they signed Nurse to a 4-year deal. He's one of the 5 highest paid head coaches in the NBA. And they did the same thing with Doc Rivers. And everyone kind of knew after that Heat series in 2022 that, once again, you could probably chalk it up to injuries. You could have all these excuses, but you probably knew that you were never getting to the Eastern Conference Finals with Doc Rivers as your head coach. And by the way, I don't even blame Doc for what happened in 2023. I put more of that on Joel Embiid and James Harden personally. But I also think that when you look at where this team is headed right now, I just don't think, like, how many times are we going to try a different coach? How many times are we going to try different co-stars? Ultimately, this just comes down to Joel Embiid being healthy and good enough to win in the playoffs. And if he's not that level of player anymore, I don't know how you can really put it on anyone except for, the GM who signed him to that contract extension, and then just the Joel himself. Like, once again, I'm not blaming Joel for being injured. That's, availability has always been an issue with him. He's tried. Like, I really don't think this is like a personal thing. Like, I think a lot of people turn this into like a personal accountability thing with Joel. And look, he's obviously had his ups and downs, especially with everything that's going on the past few months. But ultimately what this comes down to is if your star player's making $60 million a year and he's not available, you're kind of dead on arrival. That's just what the reality of the new NBA is.
Yep, and as we've talked about before, like with Embiid, even if of course it's not his fault that he's getting hurt, but at some point when that becomes the expectation and the pattern in the postseason, that just is what it is. Doesn't mean it's your fault, but that is what it is, and that's what your team can unfortunately bank on, that you won't be 100% or at your best in the playoffs. And that players-only meeting that leaked last week, I think speaks to a little bit of that as well, where it's like, no one's blaming you for being injured, Joel Embiid, but we can definitely blame you for needing your young co-star to be calling you out about just showing up on time for, quote-unquote everything. I know Embiid later downplayed it and said that was a small part of the conversation. He was only late to a couple things while he was out, but what was reported that Maxey said you're late for everything. Just in general, it's not a good look. And that leads me to my next question, which is, given all of the factors at play here, do you sense that Philly is finally giving up? And I mean this more from a fan base perspective, because they've gone to bat for Joel Embiid over the years. Do you feel like those, very hard to please Sixers fans, yourself included, are getting to a point where you're losing faith in Joel Embiid's ability to be that guy for the franchise, to be the one that finally brings his franchise to the promised land?
I mean, if you had asked me this question probably at any time before this season, I think I probably would have said something along the lines of, look, I think it's all just about getting him healthy and getting his body right and hoping that you can build a good enough team around him to survive that. I think that people kind of became apathetic towards the Sixers after the Celtics series in 2023. Yep. I think a lot of people viewed that as their best chance to win a championship. I think a lot of people viewed that as, them finally being able to kind of slay the dragon that is the Celtics that have kind of tortured them over the years. And they had their best chance to do that in that series, and they weren't able to pull through. So the last year and a half, I would say, is general apathy towards Joel and Sixers from most of the fan base. Now, look, the diehard Sixers process people that have been around since the beginning of all this, that have seen Joel through his ups and his downs of his career, they're probably always going to be in Joel's corner to an extent. I think that most fans are not that, though. I think most fans, even if you want to, include casual fans in this that maybe have the Sixers as their second team, have already completely checked out on the team. Like, I don't think that they really have ever viewed, once that series was done, I think they kind of viewed this window as shut, and everything else was just a bonus after that, whether it was, Maxi's star leap that we saw last year, or the cap space plan that they had to bring Paul George in. Like, I think that more people were excited about this season for sure. I think when we talked during the summer, I think people viewed this as kind of their Hail Mary opportunity to try to really bring a championship to Philly. But with Joel's injury, with Paul George's unavailability, with the bad start, I think people are starting to realize that they probably have the better chance to get a top 5 pick in this draft than even make the conference finals, to be honest with you.
And I think that's the perfect segue to my last kind of talking point and question for you, which is, we kind of danced around the topic of Daryl Morey a little bit and some of the blame he should shoulder for some of this as the lead executive in charge of the roster construction. We also know Daryl Morey is a big probabilities guy. It's what drove him in Houston. It's what drives him in Philly when he looks at probability of winning a championship, and that being the deciding factor in whether you make an all-in move, what you do, and how you approach that season. He's talked before about if you even have a 5% or more chance to win a championship, if you believe that, then you can go all in for it that season. Based on what's transpired so far in Philly and Daryl Morey's track record and that probability stuff we just talked about, how close do you think the Sixers are and Daryl Morey is to being like, you know what? This season is actually already a wash. Our pick in 2025 is only top 6 protected. This draft class is stacked. We are actually just going to wave the white towel, the white flag on this season, shut Embiid down, or maybe keep George out longer than it needs to be, all these things, and start racing to the bottom like some of these other teams.
I'll be honest, I don't think they need to do anything. I think that this team is horrible. If you look at usually you can look at if they just get, you talked about the Milwaukee Bucks a little bit earlier, right? You were like, early in the season, they weren't even looking good when they had their best players available. It was a weird start, and I could remain optimistic because eventually we'll get Paul George and Joel Embiid back. Well, the franchise has kind of sent the message that they are not going to change the plan they had, which was sitting one of Paul George and Embiid out in back-to-backs, having them miss time. They're already missing time. When someone gets healthy, someone else gets injured. The load that Tyrese Maxey had to carry through the first few weeks of the season eventually ended with a hamstring injury for him. Then he comes back and he's on a minutes restriction. In his first game back, him and Paul George and Joel Embiid have played 10 minutes on the whole season together. It's just not something that they really even have to worry about, in my opinion. To keep their pick, they would have to be one of the 3 worst teams in the NBA. And let me just say, I think that's very achievable for this team.
To guarantee that they keep their pick, right?
So there would be a 7% chance that they could lose their pick if they have the 3rd worst record. Right. If they have one of the 2 worst records, they are guaranteed to keep their pick. They can't have. And by the way, when Daryl Morey made that trade back in 2020, this was the Al Horford salary dump for Danny Green, which of course comes back to bite the Sixers as every move does. I think that they probably factored in how is Joel Embiid going to be by 2025? And if there is an opportunity for us to tank in a few years, can we do it? And really, this team has put it on a silver platter for them.
Yeah.
Because I think, once again, that I would make the argument. One of the things I do is I watch the other teams in the NBA, and I watch random role players, and I go, where would this guy rank on the Sixers this year? And I was watching Dennis Schroeder last night, and I was like, there's an argument he could be our best player or our second best player behind Jared McCain this year. And that is just shows you how dire of a situation that the Sixers have right now, where the players are never available. When they are available, they're not able to all get on the same page. And I don't see this season really turning around in a meaningful way. And think about the teams that are currently tanking. There are really only two teams that are currently tanking that are fully leaning into it, and it's the Wizards and the Jazz. And I think you could make an argument that when you consider the availability, when you consider everything, I think the Wizards are the only team that clearly has a pathway to being worse than the Sixers. I think the Jazz right now probably have more talent between Colin Sexton and Lauri Markkanen and Walker Kessler and all those guys. They at least have a functioning team and system that they know how to play off of each other, and they can scrape out some wins. So once again, I don't really think they have to do much. Like, unless Joel Embiid returns to all NBA form even, and Paul George comes back and looks like an all-star, that's the only time that they have to worry about any situation like that, because this team just stinks.
Yeah, that's for sure. And, I hope this isn't the case for your sake, but from a content perspective, it would be kind of gold. And I was thinking about it as you were talking there, but like the most Sixers thing would be they either do wave the white flag or just naturally tank because they're so bad, end up with the third worst record, and then somehow cash in on the 7% chance that they end up with the 7th pick and lose that pick in a top draft class. The other thing I was thinking, just before I let you go too, the other thing I was thinking is like, I mentioned when you came on here that the technical difficulties we've both had today are a perfect microcosm of everything that's gone wrong in Philly, and we can't have you on without there being difficulties. What was actually a microcosm of everything that's gone wrong in Philly this year was even the poor social media department. Just trying to put a simple graphic out with the word final chooses the worst font ever. And all I will say, for our viewers, go Google it, 76ers final Twitter meme, whatever. All I will say is that the word it ended up looking like, it's how the Sixers have been taking it so far this season. That's all I'll say.
Certainly have. Let's just say they certainly haven't been tidy this season, and that is also a way that you could just use that word. So, I think it would be a perfect ending to this season for them to kind of not even really fully embrace the tank, or embrace the tank, and like you said, give another top pick to Oklahoma City. After, if you think about I said this to a friend yesterday. I said, if you want a microcosm of how the last 5 to 10 years for the Sixers versus the Celtics have gone, a few years ago, the Celtics made a trade for a player that I really like in Derek White. I think Derek White was always a guy who was underrated when he was in San Antonio. But since he has gone to the Celtics, he might make the All-Star team this year. He might make the All-Star team because he has made one of the greatest shooting leaps in career that I've ever seen from a player. He was always a volume guy that was willing to take tough shots in San Antonio, but he was, a 34% three-point shooter before he got to Boston. Since then, he's basically been a 40% guy on extreme volume, one of the best pull-up and catch-and-shoot guys in the NBA that truly makes their team kind of an unstoppable force. A few months later, the Sixers traded for DeAnthony Melton, who I also liked and was, an up-and-coming shooter that was a defensive guy, and is basically on the verge of maybe having to medically retire from basketball with the Warriors because he just can't stop having back knee injuries. So if you want to understand what it's like to be a Sixers fan, I think that is the perfect microcosm of what these last 5 to 10 years. Everything seems to go right for the Celtics. Everything seems to go wrong for the Sixers beyond just, obviously, them making the finals and actually winning titles. So that just summed it up perfectly for me.
I feel for you, buddy, but I will say, again, not to laugh at your expense, but for all of our viewers, listeners, follow Trill at TrillBroDude on Twitter. Subscribe to the You Know Ball Pod and watch this guy's live streams during Sixers game this season in particular, because I promise you, Sixers fan or not, happy or sad, you will be entertained just like we were today, despite the technical difficulties. So Trill, honestly, appreciate you taking the time, man, and we will definitely have you on again later this year. Hopefully it'll be a happier conversation.
Thanks, Cash. I really appreciate it. Most of the people that watch the streams now, by the way, aren't Sixers fans. It's Celtics fans. It's Raptors fans. It's people enjoying my suffering.
watching.
So if that gives you an idea of what it's like, it's certainly enjoyable if you're not a Sixers fan.
Parting note, last thing, because you mentioned Raptors fans. Happy one day after the 5th anniversary, by the way, of Marc Gasol holding Joel Embiid scoreless. And with that, we are putting a bow on our conversation with Trill. Thanks again to Trill. Thanks to JD Bunkis. Thanks to Alex Wong. Thanks to Zach and Adrian in the control room. My name is Joseph Casciaro. This has been The Unfiltered Show. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next week.